Yo, what's up, chefs? It's Vinny, and today we're going to be taking a look at all of the changes coming to Path of Exile 2 on April 4th for the new league, Dawn of the Hunt. But not only that, I've also given quite a bit of thought to the things that I would like to see get changed or that I think need to get changed in order to improve the state of the game. So I've broken this down into three different sections. We have the announced changes. These are things that they've already released teasers for. They're obviously going to be coming to the game, and we're just waiting for them to reveal the full details on March 27th. After that, we have the anticipated or likely changes. These are things that either I or the community at large seems to agree need to be changed about the game. And I would say there's some level of likeliness that they are going to be changed for 0.2.0. And lastly, we have the section that I'm aptly naming Copium Land. These are going to be the things that I personally would really like to see get changed about the game. Not everyone has to agree with me, and I admit that some of these are probably unlikely to change as early as 0.2.0. But you could look at this as kind of like my wish list of changes for the game that I hope at least get looked at in advance of or leading up to the full release of the game. We're going to start things off with the announced or guaranteed changes, and we're going to kind of blast through these because, as I already said, these are things that have already been teased or fully announced by GGG. I'll be including links to both of these official pages down below in the description in case you want to come and look at the changes for yourself. But with that being said, we of course have the release date coming on April 4th for the new league. We have the Huntress reveal, which should get fully revealed on March 27th. We have at least two new Ascendancy classes that have been confirmed, one for the Warrior, one for the Mercenary. The Warrior looks like it's going to be some sort of like blacksmith or sword master type of thing. Potentially we'll get like an animate weapon skill for them. It's hard to say for sure though. There's been a little bit, like it's a little bit more unclear what the Warrior Ascendancy is going to be. And then for the Mercenary, we have something that looks like it's going to be a minion-based Ascendancy. And I would say it's somewhat likely that we end up seeing this new skill, Summon Companion, which for those of you that have played POE 1, this looks like it's going to be very similar to Animate Guardian. So you're going to be able to summon up a minion, and then you're going to be able to equip them with a loadout of gear, armor, weapons, stuff like that, and they'll be able to help you in battle, obviously. After that, we should be seeing some tower and atlas tree improvements. They have already talked about this in some of their teasers. I think to be specific, they explained that, towers, they're not going to be able to spawn with mechanics, and they'll also be influenced by your other towers' tablets that you've already completed, so you'll be able to juice up your towers quite a bit. And they've also said that they're going to be making some improvements to the Atlas skill tree as well. Following that, they've also announced multiple new unique items that are coming to the game. Pretty cool. New support and skill gems, obviously. They have not teased that many, just to be clear. They've only teased like a handful of them. There's not a ton yet. And then also a new Essence boss, potentially a Pinnacle encounter. I would assume it's going to be a Pinnacle encounter, but, it doesn't. I can't say for sure. It's guaranteed. Looks like it's going to be a new boss, though. And I would say it's very, very likely that it's just going to be another Pinnacle encounter. And following that, we're going to be moving on to the anticipated or likely changes. As I said before, these are things that I think the community at large tends to agree need to get changed about the game. And I would say there's some level of likelihood that these specific changes we will see in 0.2.0. Starting things off, we have improvements and additions to the current crafting systems within the game. I think it kind of goes without saying, if you've been playing the game a decent bit, you've probably experienced this yourself, but currently the overall crafting in the game is not very fleshed out. It's basically just a massive RNG fest that occasionally results in you ending up with a good item. Of course, there are omens and there are like some methods in the game already that do allow for a little bit more of deterministic or like more advanced crafting. But the omens are so incredibly rare and expensive that basically no one has really gotten to mess around with them. Only like the top 0.1% of players have even really gotten to use omens in their crafting. So I think we're very likely going to see some changes or things that improve it. Just some possible examples, if they wanted to copy paste stuff over from PoE 1, would be like Orb of Alteration, Crafting Bench, etc. If you ask me, I personally don't hope that they add over like an Orb of Alteration. I don't really want to just be sitting there spamming Orbs of Alteration on magic items, hoping that eventually I get the correct 2 modifiers. I like to see something a little bit more innovative that maybe provides a little bit more of a deterministic approach. It's just like a completely off the top idea, but maybe you combine an Orb of Alteration with an Essence, and if it's like an Essence of Lightning, then when you use them both at the same time on the magic item, you have some level of increased chance to see lightning modifiers. Who knows? Something that makes it more than just going to Craft of Exile, figuring out how many expected Orbs of Alteration you'll need to use, and then using like 1,000 in a row and just praying. After that, of course, full economy reset. I would say this one's very obvious, although I don't think GGG has officially announced it yet, which is why it ended up in the anticipated section. But it goes without saying, the league's going to be basically a 3-month league by the time that the April 4th rolls around, and the economy is getting out of control. We definitely do need to see a full, fresh league start with this new patch. After that, we have major balance changes to existing builds, passive tree, and defenses. I'm sure many of you know, if I go over here to PoE2 Ninja and we look at standard, we have a plethora of Stormweavers, Stat Stackers, Tempest Flurry or Ice Strike Invokers, and then everything below that sees a much lower percentage of the player base playing them currently. I think we're we're due for some balance changes. Obviously, Double Heralds is probably going to get nerfed. I'd anticipate some nerfs to some of like the overused unique items in the end game, and we'll probably just see a bunch of things get changed around. Nerfs to the things at the top and buffs to the things at the bottom, hopefully squishing things together in the middle. Following that, we have a data mined, skill, and support gems. Some of you may have seen my video that I already did on this, but there's a ton of just data mined, skill, and support gems. Many of these have not been teased at all by GGG, and I anticipate on March 27th, we'll see a lot more skill and support gems get announced or released that we should expect to see in 0.2, of course. Some of the main ones to note would be Spectres. I think we'll see that in 0.2, Hydra Companion, Demon Magus, Rolling Magma, Animate Guardian. All of these that are listed here, I would not be surprised if we do see coming in 0.2. Following that, we have a new league mechanic. This one is maybe a little bit less likely than the other ones that I've touched on so far, but I would still say a lot of people seem to think that it's probably coming based on the fact that the new patch is given a name, Dawn of the Hunt. I would say it's quite likely that we do see a new league mechanic introduced with this. It's possible that this new Essence boss could be their version of a new league mechanic, but I'm thinking we'll see something different. Just as an example, we could see Einhar with the Bestiary. That's just, a potential option. Same with the crafting stuff. I kind of hope they don't just copy paste things over from PoE 1. And at the very least, if they do bring Einhar into the game, I wouldn't actually be opposed to that, but I just hope it's, improved a little bit, innovated on, and just kind of fits within PoE 2 better than it did within PoE 1. Next up, we have more MTX or microtransaction imports. I think this one's kind of a given, if I'm being honest, but of course, GGG, I don't believe, has officially announced it. I think we should see, hopefully, a big influx of MTX transactions that, you paid for in PoE 1 get imported over to PoE 2. Of course, once the game's fully released, they've already clarified that they want to have all of the transactions go back and forth between the two games. So I'm hoping we see a big chunk of those get added in for 0.2. Don't know how many, but currently the vast majority of my microtransactions do not work. I have very, very few that I can actually use, and I'm hoping we get some more. Next, I'm hoping we see more third ascendancies released. So of course, as you know, we're already getting one for the Mercenary and Warrior, and all of the classes will have third ascendancies come the full release. But if we don't see another class besides the Huntress, like Druid, then I do hope we get more than just 2 of the third ascendancies for the original cast of classes. If we do end up seeing another class, then I wouldn't be surprised if we don't get any more than just the 2 though. Following that, we have quest rewards being changeable. I think this is something that they've talked about in the past or that they've confirmed would be coming to the game, but I don't think they've confirmed it for 0.2. But with that being said, I don't think it would be that. I can't imagine it would be that hard for them to make the change, so I do think it should come in 0.2. I think it's kind of annoying the way it's currently set up. I mean, once you go through Act 3 and Act 3 Cruel and you do the Venom Vials, you just can't change those. And especially like if you're playing a build that eventually wants to get Chaos Inoculation, but it doesn't have it yet, then getting the Chaos Resistance would be like really good for you. But if you're eventually going to go Chaos Inoculation, and then in the current state, you just don't want to get the Chaos Resistance because you can't change it later. So hopefully that is something that they make a change to in 0.2. And finally, we're moving on to Copium Land. As I said before, you should view this or think of this as my wish list of changes to come to the game. I would say some of them are plausible to happen in 0.2, and some of them are not so plausible to happen in 0.2, so that's just something for you to keep in mind. Starting things off with the Druid reveal though. This is one of the ones that I would say is certainly possible to happen in Dawn of the Hunt. It fits the theme. They've definitely talked about it before, prior to the game even being released, that the Druid and Huntress were their 2 like most completed classes that weren't going to be available in early release, that they were pretty much ready to go. They were just putting on like the polishing touches or the finishing touches and polishing them up. So I think it's possible, but I'm just kind of the belief that I shouldn't get my hopes up for it and, prevent myself from the possible heartbreak. After that, we have third ascendancy for all existing classes, similar to before where I said more third ascendancies released. I think if we don't see Druid, I'm really hoping that we do see a third ascendancy for all of the, original cast of classes. And I'm just saying this kind of because their original timeline was 6 months to a year, if I remember correctly, and we are already 4 months in. I think it's completely evident at this point that we're not getting a 6-month timeline. That goes without saying. But if we even want to stay within that 1 year time frame, we got to start pumping these, ascendancies and classes out. So that's just kind of my hope. I'm not a game developer though. Don't get mad at me. I'm not telling GGG what to do. They know what to do. I'm just saying, if we want to stay within the time frame, it has already been 4 months. After that, we have more stash tabs. In particular, I'm looking for Breach, Tablets, Pinnacle Fragments / Trial Fragments. These are like 3 separate tabs that I would hope to see, and I'd say it's more than likely, or maybe not more than likely, but it's definitely possible that we could see them in 0.2. Just kind of depends on the developer's priorities. But, looking at Breach, for example, like I'm not a huge fan of having to set aside a premium tab or a regular tab for all my Breach catalysts. And then I have to put my Breach Splinters in my currency tab. And then when I eventually want to convert my Breach Splinters into a Breach Stone, they no longer go in the currency tab for some reason, which, I don't understand. But so hopefully we get a Breach tab. Tablets tab. Currently I have 2 full tabs going towards tablets. I've got like a meh tablet tab and then a good tablet tab. I could probably just get rid of my meh tablet tab, but I would like to just see a full-on tablet tab or integrate tablets into the Waystone tab would be the best case scenario. It'd save people money and, but that's up to GGG. And then finally, just another example would be like Pinnacle Fragments and Trial Fragments. So my thought process here would be like Delirium tab that we currently have, your Simulacrum Splinters and fully converted Simulacrums go there. But instead of that, if we just had 1 tab that would put like your Breach Splinters, Breach Stones, Simulacrum Splinters, Simulacrums, Audience with the Kings, your Ultimatum Fragments, your Jin Barias, your Inscribed Ultimatums, like all of that stuff, if that could just all go into 1 tab, I think that would be nice. It's definitely not necessary, and I'm sure they could even put that into the currency tab somehow, or they could fit that into another tab, but I'm just throwing it out there. And I'm sure there's other stash tab options that would be nice to come into the game as well. These are just the three that I thought of off the top of my head. Following that, I would like to see some quality of life innovations for the current tower/Atlas dynamic. Now, just to be clear, I am not a PoE 2 Atlas hater. Like, I know there are people out there that just absolutely hate the new Atlas setup, the way towers work. They think it's incredibly tedious and all that stuff. I'm not personally one of those people. I think it's pretty solid. With that being said, there are some things about the overall way it works that just don't sit amazingly with me, and I haven't had enough time to like fully flesh out my feelings on this or the solutions to it. So I'm just kind of like, splurge it out to you, and if you agree or feel the same way or share the sentiment, feel free to let me know in the comments. If you don't, you can let me know that as well. But my like main gripe with it is, I don't know if RNG is the right word, but I'm not a huge fan of the way when I go into my Atlas and I look 360 degrees around, I'm basically looking for certain things and then going in that direction, and everything else is like kind of meh, like feels like poop. And kind of what I mean by that is the towers in particular, towers and citadels, but towers in particular. When I open up my Atlas, if I'm planning on farming some waystones, I'm looking for a grouping of like 4, 5, 6 towers all within the same general area. And my steps for, setting that up are going through a ton of maps that feel like shit. Like, I get no loot. I get some XP, I guess, but I basically get no loot. They're not juiced up by towers or anything. I'm just routing to the towers, and then once I've gotten there, if you're doing breach maps in specific, you have to like clear out the bad maps that aren't good for breach, and it's just like a whole bunch of like stuff that feels useless. Like, there's an ends to the means, or there's an end to the means, but it feels useless in the moment. You're not getting anything from it. It feels very bad. And then after that, you set up all your towers, and then you go run a bunch of maps, and those maps feel pretty good. Particularly depending on how well you juiced them and what type of content you're running, whether it's breach, ritual, expedition, or whatever. But those tend to feel pretty good. My main issue is like the build up part, and the part of, okay, I set up my towers, I just cleared all the juiced maps, and it's like, oh shit, now I got to go do it again. Now I don't have any way to do juiced maps right now. I have to go find another group of towers. I have to do the whole setup process, and eventually, like a couple hours later, I'll be able to do some juiced maps again. Like I said, I don't know how they fix this. I don't think it's like a huge issue, but I'm looking for something in the coming months or year leading up to the launch of the game that improves the quality of life of the current, tower and Atlas dynamic. This is a completely random off the top possible idea. Like I said, I haven't given enough thought to this, but maybe if you could like stash towers or like usable towers somehow, if like, let's say there's a random tower by itself and it's not in a group, maybe you had like a counter at the top of your Atlas where you could complete the tower, and instead of putting a tablet into it because it's by itself, you can't like multi-tower juice maps in the area. So using a tablet in that tower would basically be useless for you anyways. If you could somehow just like yoink the tower and then be allowed to put it somewhere else. So like maybe you've got one tower here and there's no other towers around it, so it's kind of a useless tower. And then you've got like 3, right over here somewhere. And 3 is like meh. It's not really what you're looking for. You're looking for like 4, 5, 6. But if I could that one tower and then go drop it somewhere over here next to those 3, and then I've got 4 towers, that would just be an example. You'd obviously have to have like a cap on how many towers you could at one time, and all these things. So I'm not sure that's the right choice or the right decision, but that's just an example. Like something like that makes it a little bit less of, okay, I'm going to go look for the group of towers. I'm going to spend an hour or 2 doing the boring shit, setting it up, and then I'm going to get the good stuff, and then I have to go through the same monotonous process again. So do with that what you will. I'm not a game developer, so I don't know the perfect solutions to these problems, but I can recognize that there's a pain point there that's led even me to spending most of my time on non-Atlas related things, so like Trial of Chaos, Trial of Secamus, Pinnacle Encounters, etc. And I think, especially from a beginner's perspective, it is not even remotely immediately clear how important towers are. I imagine there is a plethora of people out there that are just kind of mindlessly running maps. They'll like throw a tablet into a tower here or there, and they do not understand the magnitude of how much more currency they'd be making if they were like properly juicing their atlas, finding the groups of towers, etc. And I don't think the game does, amazingly at introducing that to players. Like it doesn't make it immediately clear how important it is. With that being said, though, moving on to the next one, and this one's a pretty simple one. I'm looking for a breach quality of life improvement. To be specific, if you've done the delirious maps or maps that have the delirious mechanic on them, not from just like distilling your waystones, but the actual delirious mechanic where you walk through the mirror and then it makes your map delirious. The way that works is as you go through, you have a timer that's ticking down. As you kill more delirious mobs and interact with more of the mirrors, the timer goes up. And when eventually it runs out, you get all of the distilled emotions and delirious specific items dropped right at your feet. I think they should, I don't know how difficult it would be, but I think they should introduce this for Breach as well. Currently, it's kind of annoying. I mean, maybe you don't share the same experience as me, but it's kind of annoying when you're running through a Breach map, especially if you get like multiple breaches in the same map. You do the breach, and that part's really fun and feels good. You're killing a ton of monsters, etc. But then the part after where you have to go back and run through sections of the map that you've already cleared just to pick up like all the candy currency, like the splinters and everything, splinters, catalysts, breach rings, all that stuff. If that could all just be dropped at the very end, it would be amazing. I'm sure it's a bit more difficult with Breach than Simulacrum because it's a lot more items, but I imagine it's probably possible. So I would hope that they add that in advance of the legal or in advance of the full release. Certainly, I don't expect that in 0.2 though. Up next, we have the POB or Path of Building and Direct Character Import. This is a pretty simple one. I don't have POB open at the moment, so I'm not going to show it, but currently we don't have the option to transfer our character from game 1-to-1 into POB. You have to go through and do everything manually, the passive tree, gear, jewels, skills, etc. I think this is probably turning away a lot of newer players from using POB at the moment. I think it's okay because we're in early access. It's completely understandable, but the sooner that they, make this available, I think the better. Following that, a loot filter improvement would be quite nice. The only one I'm looking for in specific is a tiered items filter, something that's going to allow us to turn or to not show the majority, if not all, rares and magics unless they are tiered. Currently, none of the loot filters that I'm aware of have this option. They all basically say that GGG has yet to enable a certain API for that to be functional. So I'm hoping we get that API enabled by GGG sooner rather than later. I think this would be a nice quality of life improvement because currently I have to, at least I feel like I have to set my loot filters up to where I do see like a lot of rares and magics more than I would like to see, just so that way I can grab the ones that are tiered. Sure, some of you have felt this same or have had this experience as well. After that, I'd be looking for a rarity of items found rework / drop rates reworked. This is one that I think it's possible that we could see it in 0.2 because there was a whole lot of hubbub around rarity of items found and that stat during the first league. At first, people were thinking that it's like extremely broken and like playing the game without it is basically shooting yourself in the foot. And then people kind of mellowed out a little bit. It seems like it's not as bad as everyone thought it was originally, but it's still pretty bad, I think. And particularly because it's another one of the things related to maps, I think, where if you're doing other content like Trial of Chaos, Secamus, or Pinnacle Encounters, rarity of items makes much less of a difference on what you're going to actually get in return for, spending your time. But when you're doing waystones, rarity of items is like extremely strong. I think it's hard to argue that it's not very, very strong. And it's just kind of annoying that it's only good for that one thing, and it's super good for that one thing. So I'm hoping they figure out a way to rework this. I don't want to see them make it good for everything, personally. I kind of just hope that rarity of items found gets nerfed or like gutted to the point to where it's not affecting your currency drops. And as a regular build, like a non-aura bot build, you shouldn't focus on it really, or you don't need to focus on it, or it doesn't feel so good that you feel like you're shooting yourself in the foot. So I'm hoping they make some changes to that, maybe just up the overall drop rates and waystones, and then significantly reduce the effectiveness of rarity of items found, and make sure that they don't like eliminate aura bots from the game somehow. I'm sure it's possible. After that, up next, I am looking for a target dummy to be added to PoE 2. Now, I know the developers have talked about this before, kind of described it like Pandora's box, where if they put a target dummy into the game, they anticipate the community is going to ask for more and more like configurations and ways that they can tweak it. But even with that being said, I think it is just extremely important that we eventually get a target dummy of sorts added into the game. I don't think it needs to be super complex. Even something as simple as just, a little scarecrow-esque looking target dummy in your hideout that has zest level resistances would be good enough. I think it is important that in the actual game itself, without having to go and download a third-party program or anything like that, that you should have a way to get an accurate representation of how effective your character is. And especially when it comes to like, if I want to just swap out this support gem, like what if I use that support gem over this one over the course of 30 seconds smacking this target dummy? Am I going to notice a difference? And this is no shade on POB because I think Path to Building is incredibly effective and helpful. But even for myself, when I'm using Path to Building, it's not really enough. Like, I'll make a change in Path to Building, but then I still want to be able to test it within the game. So currently, my target dummy is just T4 Zest. I'm sure there are other people that know this feeling where you get a new item or you make a change or a significant, alteration to your support gems or whatever, and you don't really know like how it's going to work. So you have to go test it, and currently the only way to do that is to go buy a breach stone, slap in the breach stone, spend like 2 to 3 minutes clearing through the breach, and then you have one like 5-10 second window to fight this boss, depending on how geared you are or whatever, to just like try and gain information. You can record it and then you can rewatch the recording. You can see like, okay, how effective were my shocks? How often was I applying my shocks? Like all of these individual, tedious things. But if I could just have a target dummy, man, like, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain, but I think having something in the game that does not require you to go download some third-party program that gives you an accurate representation of how effective your character is at any given time is just incredibly important. I think there's a reason why they're in so many other games that revolve around character progression, because you want to see as you make improvements, you want to actually see that represented in the game outside of just doing the content. Like you want to be able to test it. So I think that's very important. Hopefully they end up adding it in advance of the full release. Next up, I'm looking for some developer clarification on mobility skills. This is another slightly complicated one that I haven't fully fleshed out my feelings and, thoughts for solutions on. And I'm not going to go into as much detail on this one as the other ones because I don't want the video to get too long. But long story short, the current state of the game and looking back at what the developers envisioned, it seemed like they made it pretty clear that they didn't want this game to be like Flame Dash, Frost Blink, Shield Charge infested. Like they didn't want you to get to level 5 and be thinking about, okay, what mobility skill am I going to use for the rest of the game to just zip around everywhere? They wanted it to be a little bit more slow, methodical, like you're actually walking and running around. without being too slow for an ARPG, of course. But I think it's like ended up landing in the middle, where, especially if you've paid attention to the recent races, pretty much everyone that did good in the races was making use of shield charge, leap slam, and then even outside of the races, when you look at the meta of the game, as you get to end game and your ability to collect currency, a lot of people are using blink. And whether they're using with temporalis or not, it's like blink and kind of shield charge, but mainly blink is your one avenue for increasing your mobility outside of getting, like movement speed on your boots and stuff like that. And with that being said, I think a lot of people feel like shoehorned into fitting blink into their build somehow, even if it doesn't make the most sense, just from a glance. And I think we could see this become more of a problem in the future, where I feel like you kind of need to go one or the other. If you put a bunch of movement skills in the game, that's fine, because then everyone has access to it. It's not difficult for some builds to get it and easier for some builds to get it. It's just like across the board, everyone has some mobility. I'd be okay with that. On the flip side, you could get rid of all of it, and you could basically make it like a running simulator with movement speed increases, and I would also be okay with that, as long as it's not too slow. But in the current situation, you have like very, very few options, which make those options extremely valuable to the point to where it makes everyone feel like they need to use them. And of course, if you're just playing through the campaign and having fun, you don't need to use leap slam or shield charge or whatever. Even in the end game, you don't need to use blink. But if you are someone that's kind of competitive and you're like trying to be efficient, you sort of feel like you need to, which I don't think is a great middle ground. I think it kind of needs to be one or the other. Or if they're going to go for a middle ground, it should be a little bit better than this. So I'm hoping they kind of clarify what their end goal is for mobility skills and even just overarching mobility in the game. I wouldn't hate to see movement speed as an implicit on boots as well. Like, yeah, I don't know. Hopefully they just give some clarification in the coming months. And then finally, the last one, super simple, is going to be new acts. I think it's possible that we see like Act 4 end up in 0.2. Could even see more than that. We might not see any though. And this one's kind of just like a given. But, I'm excited for the new acts, and I'm hoping that we see one in 0.2. Obviously, we'll see 4, 5, and 6 by the time the game's fully out. But I think the sooner we see these, the better. It gives the developers more time to actually make modifications. As I'm sure many of you remember, Act 1, 2, and 3, while being amazing on most fronts, definitely had some issues with like checkpoints and the general nature of every zone you go into to be very, very large. So the earlier we get our hands on Acts 4, 5, and 6, the easier it'll be for GGG to take note of our feedback and, make improvements. And that is going to conclude the video. If you agreed, disagreed, felt like I left something out, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'll also be live streaming the full reveal on March 27th, or I'll be co-streaming it, so feel free to join in for that. And other than that, I will see all of you on April 4th for the Dawn of the Hunt. And last but not least, take it easy, chefs.